Hey, Dylan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you. So it's the Drummey Angle. Now people can follow you on Instagram at the Drummey Angle. And of course, there's a link there where they can check out some of your blog, your website, and all the great stuff. And of course, the articles from the rest of your team. Now you have a website that's dedicated to general baseball fans. You help them understand sabermetrics a little better. You kind of bridge the gap between maybe some of the techies jargon, but you kind of explain it in a very concise way, just for the everyday fan to understand. If that's what makes your site just so unique there, that it's not overbearing, but again, it's very unique, and it seems like you got a pretty big following.
Yeah, we've been doing decent for ourselves. We started out it started out with just me. Basically, I my goal is to work for a Major League Baseball team. And then a lot of my people just around me felt the need that they also like sabermetrics and they wanted a place to publish their work that they didn't really have an opportunity to do so otherwise. And now I think I have 8 staff members under me now, and we've grown. But yeah, we're starting to get a bigger following, get a lot more views on our blog, and I'm loving it. Instagram has done really well. People seem to really appreciate our content there. But yeah, just explaining sabermetrics, people want to learn about it. People want to learn about what's changing baseball.
So, I mean, what's kind of like maybe just different between your site? There are some sites a little similar, but you guys kind of stick out a little bit more. Like, what just makes you guys like different than some of the other sites that do somewhat something similar?
Absolutely. So our perspective, I'd argue, is a little different just from the fact that we have such a wide range. We have people like me on the site who are doing research, basically we're publishing research and stuff like that and providing frameworks and guidelines for people to follow under a sabermetric standing. And then some of our authors are finding, presenting a more the regular conventional view that you can find with other sites, but also are adding a bit of a sabermetric twist to it, if you get what I'm saying. So we kind of provide a wide spectrum instead of maybe having a sole focus on one or the other. Like if you go to fangraphs.com, most of what you're going to see is purely sabermetrics and purely that. And to be honest, a lot of it to go to a site like that, you have to be initiated a bit in sabermetrics and know a decent bit about it to actually understand the articles. So our goal is that there aren't those barriers to entry when people read our stuff. We want people to be able to come in with what they know and actually understand some of the conventional stuff, be familiar with it, and have that, but also have the sabermetric guide to it that they can look at something and be like, oh, that's why this player is valued more, or this player is that, and they can start to understand a little bit more about baseball.
Gotcha. So you're the founder of the Drummy Angle. So how'd you get this, blog and site off the ground?
Yeah, it basically it started with, like any good thing, started with an idea. I just was like, I'm not doing much. I want to work in baseball. I want to maybe write about baseball. Maybe that would be a good way to get out my work and to work for a team. And so I started the website and designed it for like 2 or 3 months beforehand. And then it started out to where I would publish weekly. I would just meet by myself. I'd publish weekly. We started Instagram. I started the Instagram page to just get people there. And we just mainly posted our articles is what we did on there originally. And then after that, I had a couple of friends approach me. They're like, hey, I love this stuff too. You want to, can I write for the site? And I'm like, sure, why not? And we let just people started coming on, and then slowly I started being starting in 2022 we started being a lot more interactive on our Instagram and basically creating more interactive content to where people could you didn't just have to go to the blog to figure out something. We were also posting new content on Instagram and stuff like that and trying to spread to other social media platforms. And from then it's just kind of been growth throughout 2022. That was a really big year for us, and we're hoping to make it even bigger in 2023.
Yeah. So some of these staff members, are these people just like maybe didn't know, but this again came to your site, met you online, and then kind of from there, joined your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So not all of our staff members who have started with us are still with us here now because people have things that sometimes they have to focus on, switch their priorities. But it's basically started out with I met a friend at a conference over the summer that I did, and he basically became my I mean, he's probably one of my closest friends now, but he goes to LSU, and I go to the University of Kentucky. And basically, we started writing a lot. He had friends that wanted to talk about baseball, and they wanted to write for the site too. And we just all basically started doing it. It's just been kind of an interconnectedness or online. I have a guy from my high school who writes for the site named Matt. And I mean, it's just a whole range of people. And I've had people reach out to us on Instagram that have been like, hey, I want to write for your site. And I've met some people through there, but it's really interesting. And all of our authors are like very, very close. Like we have group chats that we just talk about baseball, just like, just like authors chats of just like going through like some random motions, saying some outlandish takes for fun. It's a fun group, honestly.
All right, and just yourself as a baseball fan. So you grew up as a Cincinnati fan, Reds?
Yeah, so I live about 30 minutes south of Cincinnati in Kentucky. And yeah, so it's right across the river. I would go like I think one season I went to I want to say over 40 Reds games. One summer. It was a busy summer. And I love baseball. I've got some family in Boston, so I've that's kind of been like, my artificial second team with, I went up there once, Fenway, it's beautiful. Got to go to Yankee Stadium once. That was fun. But that's kind of how my lineage works. But it's more of just much closer to a Reds fan than anything, just because of how close it is, which has been a very, very painful stint for the last decade or so.
Obviously, what I like about your site and some of the articles you've written, this past season to kind of dispel some of the myths. And because one article you wrote back in November is kind of regarding the small ball thing. And as Yankee fans, Yankee fans claimed, oh, the Yankees is relying on the home run too much and they don't play enough small ball. But kind of break it down when small ball is only relevant at certain times of the game. So you kind of want to explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Small ball is a common myth that many can like fans with. I first want to start out there. I want to differentiate because I consider kind of two types of fans: the fans with more conventional logic and the fans with more sabermetric logic to how they approach baseball. And it's more like a political spectrum. You're not one or the other, but you're likely on a spectrum from one or the other. And I think a lot of conventional leaning fans hold on to the myth of small ball that you can play, get runs and stuff like that. But the thing is, small ball tactics that are generally adapted, while they've been touted as they're going to produce more runs, when you do the math, when you get down to it, bunting and stuff like that, stealing bases in most situations isn't necessarily justified unless the game is at certain points, but using it as an all-out strategy is almost never justified. It's teams play big ball for a reason now. I mean, that's if you want to call it big ball. It's teams play for the home run. They play for getting on base a lot more and not sacrificing outs for a reason. Teams are smarter than most fans. I think that's also a misconception too, is people a lot of times, I mean, as humans, we obviously think that we're, smarter. We want to think we're smarter. We know things that others don't. But the thing is, Major League Baseball teams are incredibly smart. They know what they're doing. There's a reason that small ball is not generally being played, in that I'm pretty sure the Cleveland Indians set a record for like, I think they didn't sacrifice one, I think once all year or something to that extent. It was something extreme to that extent. I don't want to misquote something, but I'm pretty sure it was some insane statistic to where it just shows how small ball is almost being completely phased out.
All right. And then, of course, another myth, of course, is the whole thing. And Yankee fans always complain about the Yankee players that when they put the shift on, oh, won't this hit with it? There's no fielders there. But you kind of break that down a little bit, where that it's actually beneficial for the player to have his maximum swing, even if it's in the shift versus being a spray hitter, which again is probably going to be a more high average, low production type of player.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things too. The interesting about that article, when I looked at it, is that there's a lot of, while I did look into a lot of stuff, there's also a lot of things that weren't necessarily considered, in the fact of, are these players doing actually at the major league levels at all, because spray hitting added to them? I'd argue to that extent, based on the article, that most of the time it's justified that a major league player should try to swing through and not spray hit. but maybe certain players don't have the ability to, their full swing is not justified. So I want to say that under certain conditions, if the player is not major league caliber, it is possible that a spray hitting approach might work. But most of the time, it's going to be to the fact that if a player is a good hitter, he should just try to swing the bat. He shouldn't try to go for all sides or do any of the, drills of going to left field. Pete Rose said, see the ball, hit the ball. For that, he's right. See the ball, hit the ball hard. That's the other thing. If exit velocities and launch angles matter much more than actually physically what direction the ball is going in on the field.
No, and that makes total sense because again, as much as past few years fans been complaining about that, you still see these players say, "I don't care, I'm just still doing my max effort swing, and whatever happens, happens."
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely it's definitely a common misconception that people have that these players are swinging for the fences, and to an extent they are, but a lot of that, and they don't think it's justified, but when you really look at it, a lot of the times it is mathematically justified. Of course, there's an optimum rate for everything, but like you got to consider these guys know what they're doing. If hitting that extra home run provides enough value for these guys, and they're going to do it. Because if it costs them another strikeout, it might be worth it. Because a strikeout compared to a regular ground out is the actual value in difference in value is not very large on average. So you got to consider a lot of these players are more willing to strike out because they know that and they can still be successful.
So now that next season, of course, the rules going to change a little bit with the infielders. You can't do the shift anymore. At least you have to have two players on each side of second base. So based on that, do you think really it's not going to affect like stats that much then?
Yes and no. So players adapt to the shift. The thing is, so I'd argue that the players who aren't able to do their full swing because they know that even if they hit with their full power to the shift isn't such an interesting proposition too, because guys like Gallo, I know Yankees fans had somewhat of a ordeal with
That's
Gallo.
who I had in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. I wrote an article kind of regarding that a little bit for the site Pitcher List. And basically guys like that, you look at their differentials between their shift and non-shift. Guys like Gallo start off with they do a lot better with no shift, and then it kind of starts to even out throughout their career because what you see is they're having to adjust. They're having to adjust their swing to go another way. Now with Gallo only having two side, the two fielders on the right side, and then one-ish fielders, depending on the outfielder alignment. It's still not going to be perfect for him, but I'd argue that somebody like him will succeed because he won't have to adjust his swing. A lot of it's really circumstantial, and it depends on the player. It depends on the position, and there's a lot of modes to logic too of just, does he know what I know? Does he know, if you kind of catch my drift there. It's not clear cut.
Now, one interesting thing I never even heard of before you break down is called Sierra, which is skill interactive earn run average for pitchers. So give us a breakdown of what that is, because that's like really fascinating. Where obviously the defense behind them also kind of is a way to measure them, even though they're the ones that's throwing the ball, they're not defending it.
Yeah, so Sierra, it kind of goes off to an extent of what FIP is. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with FIP. It's fielder independent pitching, but basically FIP established that pitchers can only control such things, and they did the thing to where at first sabermetrics guys tried to be like, okay, pitchers can only control this. They can't control hits on the ground, etc. Blah blah blah. And then when people started looking into it more, they learned, okay, these pitchers actually do control contact. They do control ground balls a bit, whether they get a lot or not. And we have to look at that more. So Sierra calculates and factors in the amount of contact that is being allowed, as well as the things that the pitcher is immediately controlling, like strikeouts, home runs allowed, etc. But it just adds an extra spice in the fact that these contact rates are being measured so that a pitcher can more accurately predict what they can control. Sierra is one of the best predictors of ERA out there, just as far as this season's Sierra and the next season for ERA. It's not the best. If you're there's another stat that I love. It's called predictive classified run average, and that's a whole nother beast that I think would probably go beyond the scope of this. But basically, it's another metric that's completely predictive in nature that aims to predict ERA through contact rates, but also factors some exit velocity stuff, and some other stuff. But Sierra is just mainly trying to factor in contact rates as well as the stuff of the other like fielder independent pitching and that to kind of make a more predictive sabermetric.
All right, and is there any stat or sabermetric out there to sort of the grade fielders? Because we always hear about ERA and batting average and stuff like that, but how do they grade like a fielder in terms of he should have gotten to that ball, or he lets a lot drop in front of him, or he's a vacuum, he catches everything? Is there any stat to really capture that and analyze if someone's in terms how much ground they are able to cover?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's fielding stats are the hardest, I will admit, out of any stat of any category. Fielding stats are the hardest to calculate just from a regular standpoint. I'm not in love. DRS and UCR used to be the prime thing of what people use, which is based on Sports Info Solutions, which basically they have guys look over fielding tapes and count how many runs a guy's saved by looking at video and stuff. And I think both are really subjective, and I'm not in love with them. But OAA is probably now the premier defensive sabermetric out there, which is run by MLB's Baseball Savant page. So basically, what happens is they take the path of a ball and what its expected runs created would be, and they actually average how many outs that have been saved based on what this player did, how fast he got there compared to the average. It's truly an interesting metric, and I would argue just because it uses all of the data of the individual players and it's not a subjective measure, it's probably the best look at a player's defensive metrics. I mean, there's one guy who I love that, and what you get with that is there's huge differentials between that and other defensive stats. So you just got to be careful. Defensive stats, we're still working on. They're probably the farthest from perfection. But if you were to go with one, outs above average on baseballsavant.com.
All right, it's interesting. Yeah, because when the Yankees brought back kind of fluff, or at least they kept him with an arbitration deal. A lot of fans are unhappy with him because he had some fielding gaps, especially in the playoffs. But Aaron Boone said, yes, they look at the stats regarding him. They say he does get to the balls correctly, this whatever that was had the justification for keeping him, but you never really know what type of stat they use to do that. But yeah, like you said, I'm sure they have their formula.
Yeah, and so that's the public version. I'm sure the Yankees have their own internal metrics to do that basically adjust based on OAA. But it's guys like that, if they're signing them for a fielding deal, it kind of goes back to the point of major league teams know what they're doing. A fan can say, oh, hey, he missed this when it was crucial. It was just odds that he happened to miss it at a time that you were watching. We really do put recency bias. That's a huge thing for a lot of baseball people, and I think it really hurts how people view players and their act compared to their actual skill level, what they're actually worth.
All right, and staying with the Yankees, of course, the big news this offseason was the big contract they gave to Judge, 9 years, $360 million. Of course, all these players, no one's ever worth that amount of money, but nevertheless, there's a justification for it. So what's your take on the whole Judge contract, what he provides, the length? Like, what do you feel about it?
Well, I will I will never justify giving a 9-year contract to a guy who's like over 30. So I'm gonna start there. So I'm not a huge fan of the deal. I think so. Obviously, any deal like that, they're expecting to gain value in the short run, and they're attempting to lose value in the long run. So they're sacrificing the future for now. So when you consider that, it gets a little better. But I'm just saying Judge has to produce quite a bit for that type of contract. And I'm not sold that he can over that long thing. You got to consider this season was incredible. The value I want to say he produced 11 He produced 11 Fangraphs WAR, which or a little more than 11, I think, and I'm pretty sure that's worth upwards of like 90 million based on to the market. Is he was worth about 90 million-ish dollars this year alone. But when you look at the odds of him repeating that, the odds of him going and continuing that over a 9-year span to where the Yankees actually make a profit in the long run, it's slim. It's a big size bet for a minimal return. I think the Yankees would be lucky to get like $40 million worth of excess value from him over the life of the contract spread out, because that's what they're trying to beat. They're trying to beat the market. And I'm not sure that they necessarily can with that type of mega deal. It obviously could change. There's a range of possibilities with Judge, but with his prior track record and the injury history, as you know, I'm not sold on the fact of that much.
Yeah, like I said before, it's one of those things where like I think you got the next 3 or 4 years, you're looking pretty, but then it's kind of like what they had with A-Rod, with some contracts like Giambi and Teixeira, where you're hanging on the guy for the last couple of years and you're kind of regretting it. But again, you're going for it now, and I think the Yankees pretty much had no choice; they had to bring him back because how do you sell that to the fan base?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing you got to consider too is, I mean, there is some intrinsic value to the fact that you're keeping him for him, not just his baseball production. From a purely baseball point, wouldn't, but there's a lot more to that. The decision's a bit deeper in depth. So actually looking at that more clearly, and you see that maybe he had to, so the Yankees fans wouldn't like revolt. I mean, it can be a little more justified, but like if I was a major league GM in that standpoint, first of all, that's a tough position for Cashman, but I mean, I don't think his first offer was that bad. I think I would have probably paid his first offer. Um, but as far as what he actually signed for, it's just you're signing for him at that point, not for necessarily his actual like playing production.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And again, that original offer, I think it was fair market value. I just think because it had a two in front of it, just the optics were bad. So just going across town in Queens for a second. Of course, it involves two other big major free agents. Obviously, the Mets, I guess, let DeGrom walk more or less, even though it seemed like maybe he didn't want to go back. But then they signed Verlander. So you put yourself as the Mets GM. All right, you're letting a younger guy in DeGrom go away, but he's injury prone. But you sign Verlander, who is more durable, at least dependable. But he's like about 40 years old. So if you're the Mets GM, what do you think there?
Well, if I was the Mets GM, my boss would be Steve Cohen, and he would probably be running the team. But it's interesting. I'm as far as Verlander was a guy in the sabermetric community that people are like, hey, this guy might have been really, really overperforming for what he was actually worth. So signing that much for him was a bit worrisome. I'm not in love with it, and I don't think he can produce his value. And I'm a big DeGrom guy. Like I'll personally admit, I'm a huge Jacob DeGrom fan, and I think he is when he's healthy, he's the best pitcher on the planet. So if that's the thing, the Rangers signed him for 37 million ish a year because they're betting on whether he will stay healthy or not. That's about the median of between his value when he's healthy and his value when he's not, which is obviously zero. If he's healthy for a full year, I mean, he could potentially be worth like 70-ish million a year. Like I definitely think that's within range for DeGrom, but that's whether he stays healthy. And the Mets have obviously knew that, and I'm sure they offered an offer that factored in the injury risk a little more, and that's why they couldn't re-sign him and didn't want to re-sign him almost to a longer term deal. But I think the Rangers, I mean, I would tilt that deal like because of the injury risk slightly to be player friendly in the fact that I don't know if the Rangers will produce excess value based now, but I think in the long term I think it's very possible it pays off if they can fix his issues. As far as Verlander, it's a short term deal. I don't think injury risk is as worrisome, but I don't know if he'll produce his value. I'm not a big mega contracts guy. I just, that's just not how I roll.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree with you. Again, if he's healthy, DeGrom, flat out the best pitcher in baseball. I just think, of course, you always got to hold your breath with him just because he puts max effort into everything, and that's usually what, ends up, getting him hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And I mean, that's the big thing about sabermetrics is trying to tackle next of injuries are a very, very big deal in developing guys to be more sustainable. I think that's what you're getting with a lot with Cal Bodie and driveline baseball. You're getting a lot of that, or body. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but I think you're getting a lot of that with that type of stuff of people trying to tackle these injuries. And if Texas can hire the right sports science people and hire the right biomechanics, maybe they can fix DeGrom, and maybe they can do it to where when he pitches his, at sitting 99-mile-per-hour fastball, that, he doesn't like die and like tear his arm, because it's not natural. But I think with the right people, they can make it work for a long enough time.
Yeah, and they always said Met fans would claim if he could just dial back a mile or two on his pitches, it would be better. But again, he does max effort. So this, I guess, as we almost that wrapped up here, you as a Cincinnati Reds fan, what do you think about Pete Rose, and again the fact that he's still not in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, so it was a big day in Ohio on January 1st. Sports gambling just became legal, and Pete Rose placed the first bet on forever, like in Ohio ever, and that was a pretty big deal. He's still revered as an icon here. It's interesting to me. It's personally, this gets obviously away from the more sabermetric stuff, but personally, I don't. He has a home in Vegas. He lives there. He hasn't done himself any favors. I definitely don't think he'll get in during his lifetime. He may get in post-mortem, but I still think that's very unlikely because he hasn't followed the character clause very well, and he hasn't been a role model. He hasn't recanted his ways. He's still a gambling icon for denying what he did, for doing what he did. So I don't think that Major League Baseball, and especially the Hall of Fame, who are notable, just, they're very set in their ways. I don't think that they're going to let him in, and I'm not sure based on their current criteria that they should.
Interesting take. So, all right. Well, again, so people could check you out, the Drummey angle. So any fan out there, if you're kind of afraid to sabermetrics or it's just too complicated to me, I would suggest check out your website, the Drummey angle. And again, you and your team do a great breakdown. And I hope you achieve your dream of becoming an employee of Major League Baseball. And I hope maybe, you sound like a smart guy. So I hope you work for the Yankees.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna lie. I've kind of had my heart set on I've kind of wanted to work for a small market team. Feels like
Come on, do the Yankees.